Raphael, welcome. It's really great of you to join us this morning for this brief opportunity to exchange. We're delighted. Sorry that you can't be with us in person, but we're really delighted to have an opportunity to talk to you. Do you want to just take a moment to present yourself, introduce yourself, perhaps, just so people can know a little bit more about you?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me this morning. I wish I would have been there, but for some reason the rules have changed regarding COVID regulation, and so I can't be there. I'm the father of 4 children, married to Karen, and we're living here in Nice. And yes, Nice is nice, absolutely. I am leading a ministry called Imago Dei, and the idea here is to reach out to cultural influencers with the gospel, but also the idea is to think about evangelism, disciple making, and also creating communities of disciples in places where we know it's very difficult to access with the gospel. I'm thinking about the fashion industry, for instance. How do you plant the seed of the gospel? How do you form communities of disciples in an industry by which, by definition, you are scattered and you are everywhere, but where you need to be on Sunday morning in a local church? So those are the kinds of issues that we are wrestling with.
Now, you know that we're in a series as a local church reflecting on the person of Barnabas in the New Testament and the way in which he was an influencer in his time. And we've just been thinking about how Barnabas and Saul were sent out from Antioch on mission. And this week we're looking at the way in which wherever they go, they plant communities, they plant new churches, which are then called to develop and grow. And as time goes on, those planting initiatives extend towards Europe. And we know that Paul's missionary journeys take him as far as Rome. And Europe has been a ground, as it were, for planting and for developing for centuries and centuries. But today, we often think of Europe as a place that's more stagnant in terms of gospel, where perhaps there's a historic decline of Christianity. But that's not all there is to be said about Europe. Can you give us, from your perspective as an evangelist and as somebody who knows the networks, what is your take on the dynamics that are at work in terms of churches in Europe today?
Well, Jim Memory just released a great report for those who really want to go deep into this matter a little bit more specifically. But I was just in Berlin this week with about leaders from 20, 30 European nations. And I can tell you one thing is that the church is growing. The church is growing at the pace of a church every 3 days, a new church every 3 days in Spain, a church every 7 days in France. And those are net figure. That means it's all the churches that are closing and all the churches that are opening. So it's the difference between the two. Now, that said, we recognize that we're coming towards the end of what we call Christian nominalism. It is the case in France. It's the case also in Scandinavian countries where, in a sense, those who would say, I am a Christian because I was born or baptized into the church, but I'm not really practicing, those kind of statements you will hear. I have a faith, but I'm not practicing. We're coming towards the end of that era of people defining themselves like this. About 10 years ago, you would ask a French Catholic, what does make you Catholic? And they would say baptism. If you ask today, what makes you Catholic, they'll say the kerygma, the fact that Jesus died for my sin and is resurrected. In a sense, it becomes a professing church in that sense. And what happens, and when you come to the end of nominalism, the only ones who are left are the militants, in a sense. And they know why they believe and they know what to do. And in that sense, it's really interesting because it creates more and more synergies between different church traditions, because we're finding ourselves militant and excited about the gospel. And this is where opportunities of collaborations are emerging more than ever before.
And militant, perhaps, does that mean that we're closer in some way to the dynamics of the early church, maybe?
Well, look at the cost that Paul and Barnabas paid to go to Asia Minor. The fact that John Mark left the team was not because he had something to do in Jerusalem. it was tough. You had to be militant in the good sense of it. Really convinced that what you are proclaiming is worth even dying. And in that sense, I find the same energy today wherever I go in Europe, of people not being satisfied with just being at the end of nominalism, but wanting to say now is the time to do new things. And that's what church planting, in a sense, is drawing a lot of new leaders who think a little bit different about how the church should function, and probably this will stir some conversations in traditional mainline churches. But innovation always happens at the fringe, right? That's something that we know, and we see good things happening even in traditional churches like the Lutheran Church with fresh expression, and those are motives of thanksgiving and excitement for me.
So would you say that there's a new dynamic of collaboration between churches? I mean, presumably all churches are more or less faced with the challenge of change. And I'm thinking particularly of traditional churches who for a long time have relied on their traditional place in society, and who are today having to say, well, either we despair because we're losing those nominal believers, or we turn towards a more missional stance and perspective. But that missional stance is in some ways in common with other more evangelical Pentecostal churches, I suppose. Is there a collaborative feel that maybe we didn't have before?
Absolutely. I think we recognize, number one, that church planting was highly competitive, if we are honest, since the 1900s. And in a sense, we said we need to have all flavors of Christian persuasions in any city. So it's a bit the McDonald's and versus the Burger King, analogy. Today, faced with the challenge of secularization, and as you say, the end of Christian nominalism, I think denominational leaders recognize that our oneness is our witness. And our togetherness is our projectivity, in the sense of gaining convergences on way we coach and train and assess church planters, and we can do much more together than we would each one on our own. And take, for instance, Alpha. Alpha is, in that sense, it's a good example of a church tradition, the Anglican Church, thinking about a way to reach out to those who are seeking God, and the Catholic Church in France, taking that and then inculturating that in their culture. And they've been running, 20,000 plus Alpha Church courses. And that is now triggering the question about church planting in the Catholic Church. And so it's an example of people with good mind and good understanding that probably the answer lies into somebody else's basket. And so I need to reach out and bridge the gap, and then seek the Lord. And probably Jesus is helping us in that regard. Maybe he doesn't want us to have all the solution for ourselves, and the fact that we are one body and that we need the other one. We need the charismata, we need what the other one. We want this. We wish we would have invented it, but it's not the case. And then reaching out in humility, in integrity, in simplicity, in a sense, as the Lausanne Covenant would say, is the posture that will make missions the way God envisioned it, which is being one.
Which joins Jesus, of course, teaching from a different angle, doesn't it? About when we're one, actually. It's a more powerful witness. The oneness is the witness. I like that. You've been involved, I know, more recently in thinking about what it means for the church to be apostolic today. Again, in many ways, we've thought of the apostolic church as being a sort of historic thing. How is that a call, do you think, to churches today faced with the challenge of mission?
Well, if you take Ephesians 4:11, where we talk about apostles and prophets and evangelists, often some would argue that the apostles and the prophets were of the time of Jesus, and then with the closing of the canon, we no longer expect to have any apostles. Well, actually, John Calvin in the 16th century recognized that God is still appointing apostles. For instance, he would recognize that Reformation was actually fueled by apostles of Christ. And so the question is, do we have the ability within our tradition to recognize that kind of ministry and give them room to actually exercise that kind of calling? And if you survey a little bit church history, one of the commonality that you'll find is that whenever apostles are not recognized or evangelists are not recognized, they will tend to actually reinvent themselves in other settings and launch new denominations or new mission agencies and so forth, which is not bad. I mean, in a sense, because sometimes it will take something like a Nicky Gumbel, for instance, to shake a little bit the foundation of a traditional church. But in that sense, I think we can do better. I think we can do better. As local churches, as denominations, we can really seek the Lord on that matter. I know that the Swedish church, for instance, has been running a learning community with 15 denominational leaders on that very topic. What does it mean to be an apostolic church, and what is the place of apostles today? And that forces them to go back to scriptures and then praxis, what we call missional hermeneutic. In a sense, the Bible talks about that. What does that mean on the ground? And then how do we revisit then and reread scriptures from that vantage point? And it's this ever going back and forth between orthodoxy and orthopraxis, which helps us to be solid in our missional theology in that sense. And so it's an urgent topic.
And probably one that reminds us that the church as a whole is sent, isn't it? That we're all sent in the sense that we're not called to stay where we are, but constantly be in movement. I'm thinking back to the example you gave right at the beginning about stepping out into the fashion industry,
yes,
or into different areas of society where perhaps historically there haven't been strong Christian forms of witness. And
yes,
we're all sent in that sense, aren't we? To
absolutely. I think John Stott said it well when he was quoting John 20 and 21, when actually the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Spirit, are sending the disciples in missions. And then Jesus, as I was sent, so I sent you. And if you look at the pattern, it's interesting. If you look at the pattern of missions within the triune God, starting from Genesis 1, they always did missions together. Very interesting. And here you have this statement, and John Stott said it's the most difficult statement to put into practice, of a triune God doing missions together, saying to this proto-community, this proto-church movement called the Disciples of Jesus, do likewise. Be Trinitarian in your missions engagement, and go in places where we will lead you to go. And that's what I like about the passage we're looking at today, Acts 14. If you look at Acts 14 and the work that Barnabas and Paul did, what did they do? Well, they reached out to the cities and they preached the gospel to the city, not just to the individuals in the city. They say they evangelize the city. What does it mean to evangelize the city? Well, you evangelize not only the people in the city, but you also evangelize the power struggles in the city, the political arena, the sociological arena. So you tackle everything that makes a city. Then they make disciples, and then they plant churches. Now, if you look back just a chapter before in Acts 13, well, of course, you see the Holy Spirit, appointing Paul and Barnabas. And the text says it well. Luke says, release them for the work I have for them, which means that the work in Acts 14 is the work of the Holy Spirit. That's what the Holy Spirit had in mind. And so we need to forget about this idea, that new church planting is a Paulinian idea. No, it's a Holy Spirit idea. And then Paul and Barnabas were set apart to do exactly the very thing that the Holy Spirit and the triune God wanted to do. So it's the whole idea of the missio ecclesia, the mission of the church is actually just trying to catch up with the mission of God, who is preceding us in missions. And for me, that's a good news, to know that it's not up to me to think about reaching out the fashion industry, that God, the triune God, is already there doing missions together and is inviting us, the church, the missio ecclesia, to join him in this. And so again, it's about listening. Where are you doing? And are we in step with the Holy Spirit in his mission?
And hence the name of your organization.
Imago Dei.
Imago Dei, Missio Dei.
Absolutely.
It's all about God, isn't it?
Yes.
Raphael, thank you so much. It's been fascinating talking with you, and many blessings on what you're doing. We're with you in prayer. We're going to pray for you now, and we're grateful for your service and the things that you're bringing to us, but also more widely. So thank you for your time. It's been great.
Thank you, Andy.